Welcome to Energy Insights. Today I'll be giving a recap on the recent G7 Environment Ministers meeting that happened in Turin in Italy. So without further ado, let's get into it. The recent G7 Environment Ministers meeting in Turin, Italy, focused on vital climate, energy and environmental issues affecting the globe. Coming into the meeting, G7 countries were under pressure to lead and take bolder action on climate change, climate finance, and clean energy. In fact, the UN's climate chief, Simon Steele, issued some frank comments before the meeting, attempting to spur action. He said, quote, "It's utter nonsense to claim that the G7 cannot or should not lead the way on bolder climate actions," end quote. He added that G7 countries must be leading from the front if the globe is to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. The G7 comprises of the globe's most powerful economies, and this includes, of course, the United States, Canada, Japan, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy. Now, the Environment Ministers meeting of the globe's most powerful economies offered up several steps to guide their climate and environmental actions over the coming years. They doubled down on their climate commitments, which was one area where the environment ministers reiterated their dedication to the Paris Agreement, which aims to keep global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The environment ministers emphasized the need for urgent action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030, and of course achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Of course, the G7 countries' climate commitments are also wedded to their strategies to see their energy systems transition to, of course, cleaner sources. And a significant portion of the environment ministers' discussion revolved around accelerating the move away from fossil fuels. They mentioned the importance of further investing in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable technologies that contribute to economic growth and energy security. Germany, for example, has recently written into legislation a target to exit coal by 2038 at the latest, but it now intends to pull that forward to 2030. Likewise, in the United States, new regulations would require coal plants that plan to stay open past 2039 to cut or capture 90% of their carbon emissions by 2032. Now, these activities in some of the globe's largest and most powerful economies are expected to ripple through international markets, and this is, of course, going to dent the demand for coal globally and promote cleaner sources of energy like solar and wind. So while there was praise for the G7's commitments to phasing out coal by early 2030 and getting serious about the most polluting form of energy, there was some concerns from commentators that lingered around the flexibility for countries heavily reliant on coal. Now, this included Japan, which has been criticized for stalling G7 progress on clean energy in the past. Now, some worries spiked about the seriousness of the G7's commitment to phasing out coal after Italy's Minister for Environment and Energy Security told journalists that G7 countries would phase out coal, quote, without jeopardizing the various countries' economic and social equilibrium, end quote. So these loopholes fueled arguments that the G7's commitments are inefficient and lack the urgency required to meet existing climate goals. Indeed, according to an analysis by Climate Analytics, the G7 needs to phase out coal by 2030 at the latest, which is far off what countries have so far committed to. Another concern around the G7's energy transition and the effects that it may have on their climate commitments, of course, comes from the continued implicit endorsement of gas as a bridge fuel. Now, gas was not mentioned in the G7 ministerial agreement, which raised the eyebrows of several commentators. Now, this included Manuel Pulgar Vidal, the global climate and energy lead for WWF. He said that the G7 must commit to phasing out oil and gas by 2050. He added that, quote, G7 countries have the opportunity to lead the world in setting the pace for climate action. They have the power to advance the energy sector transformation at the scale and pace needed to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. They must do better, end quote. Others, like Climate Analytics head of climate policy, Jane Ellis, said that not mentioning gas is indeed the wrong direction to be heading in, both for the economy and for the climate. Now, much of this rhetoric on gas has carried over since 2023's G7 Environment Ministers meeting, which was at the time hosted in Japan. So back then, Japanese representatives were reportedly pushing the group to permit further investment in developing gas fields across Asia. And Japan cited that it needed gas to provide the country with enough energy security and wanted to also help other countries transition away from coal by using liquefied natural gas. Now, moving away from energy and into climate finance, the G7 continued to raise the importance of energy transitions in developing countries. And they said in one of their final texts from the meeting that they intend to be leading contributors on climate finance. And they added that they acknowledge that this needs to mobilize trillions of dollars. And while this statement was welcomed, the G7 stopped short of actually making any new financial commitments or offering any new strategies on how to go about supporting the energy transitions in developing countries. Now, this received some pushback from some commentators, such as Andreas Sieber of 350.org, who said that the world's largest economies must support global renewable energy transitions by providing finance at scale and should, quote, urgently pull out of funding fossil fuels both at home and abroad, end quote. Now, this comes off the back of the existing climate finance goal set several years ago to support developing countries, which was placed at $100 billion a year by 2020. And this never materialized to its fullest extent, of course, and it has since been suggested that the amount will go up into the trillions annually by 2030. And this was according to a policy publication from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Luca Bergamaschi, director of Italian think tank ECCO, said that, quote, climate ministers are hitting a wall on climate finance. These decisions rest on finance ministers, so they need to step up and step in, because they have the power and responsibility to do so, end quote. It's not certain that these comments coming from the G7 will lead to an increase in trust between countries going into further negotiations for climate finance in the future. Indeed, trust on climate finance commitments is low as it is between developed and developing countries, seeing as the original $100 billion per year commitment was never really delivered on. But it is hoped that as 2024's calendar edges closer to the COP29 climate conference later in the year, that the G7 can, as the UN climate chief suggested, lead on climate action, and this will hopefully provide more ambitious and firm climate finance commitments. Ultimately, it'll boost the climate ambitions also of developing countries attempting to leapfrog fossil fuels and move directly into an energy system powered by cleaner sources. So overall, while the G7 has provided a wide range of coverage and commitments on a number of crucial issues, there are still several lingering questions and concerns on things like the speed of phasing out coal, matching the latest scientific modelling, the implicit endorsement of gas, especially in countries like Japan, who also want to export the model to other Asian countries, and of course, clarity on climate finance commitments that will support the energy transition in developing countries. All of this will come to a head at COP29 later this year as the globe once again begins its annual climate action negotiations. I hope you enjoyed this recap, and I'll see you next time on Energy Insights. If you found this episode valuable, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends or colleagues, and visit our website at energytracker.asia for more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Energy Insights.